Welcome to the Curious Advantage podcast, an exploration of the idea of curiosity and its increasing importance for thriving in the digital age from the authors of The Curious Advantage.
Hello, and welcome to this episode of the Curious Advantage podcast series. This series is about how individuals and organizations use the power of curiosity to drive success in their lives and organizations, especially in the context of our new digital reality. It brings to life the latest understanding from neuroscience, anthropology, history, and behaviorism about curiosity and makes these useful for everyone. My name is Simon Brown. I'm one of the authors of the book, The Curious Advantage, and Chief Learning Officer at Novartis. And today I'm here with my co-authors, Paul Ashcroft.
Hello.
And Garrick Jones.
Hi.
And our distinguished guests. We're delighted to be joined by Vas Narasimhan, CEO of Novartis. Hi, Vas.
Hi, Simon.
And Stephen Baert, Novartis' Chief People and Organisation Officer. Hi, Stephen.
Hello, Simon.
So there should be something daunting about interviewing your boss and your boss's boss on a podcast. But as we have a culture of being unbossed, it makes it slightly less nerve-wracking. So let's start there with unbossed, or rather the Novartis culture. So Vas, when you came into role as CEO in 2018, you made it your number one priority to unleash the power of our people and change the culture. What was it that prompted this focus around culture?
Simon, first, thanks for having us. When I reflect back, I think one thing that had become clear to me over the years is that the most powerful asset that a corporation or any organization has is ultimately its people. We look at the financial assets, we look at the physical assets, but in the long run, what creates tremendous value, what creates the largest impact is ultimately the human beings and the environment you create for those human beings. So if you believe that as a starting point, your people are your most valuable asset. And if you believe in that the positive side of human nature, and that if you give people a sense of purpose, a sense of autonomy, a sense that they can be curious and improve themselves, they'll perform their best. There's tremendous, opportunity, I think, to create outstanding performance through culture change. So, when you look at the history of large companies, we go back 100 years, and under the world of Frederick Taylor and large-scale manufacturing, we saw that people were treated like cogs in a factory. We kept that way of thinking for probably far too long until relatively recently. And I think now there's been a resurgence in understanding that with knowledge workers, you need to create an environment that enables them to really be their best. So that's what Unbossed is all about: servant leaders, inspired people, and hopefully an environment focused on curiosity.
Just to build on that, what led you then to choose inspired, curious, and unbossed for the culture?
Stephen can speak to this as well, but I'm very heavily influenced by Daniel Pink's work, which talks a lot about human motivation. I think Daniel Pink in around 2008 and 2009 kind of rekindled an awareness of really old thinking, going back to the Tao Te Ching and older books back, from the 6th, 7th century BC, that fundamentally human beings are motivated, as Daniel Pink would say, by purpose, autonomy, and mastery. And we thought about, okay, if that's the motivators, then what is the environment? So purpose relates to inspiration. Autonomy is really around the unbossed mindset. And mastery is really all about curiosity. If you give people its ability to be curious, they can improve their ultimate mastery and feel fulfillment around that. I think also Carol Dweck's work certainly had a significant impact as well. I think having an organization that had a much stronger learn-it-all mindset or a learning mindset, I think was super important to me. And I think curiosity captures that spirit.
And Stephen, why do you see curiosity as so important?
I think we live in a world where digital solutions that we have around us have addressed the obvious, but even the complicated. The obvious has been automated. The complicated, artificial intelligence and machine learning can do a lot there. The real added value of people, of humans, is how we thrive in complexity. And the interesting thing about complexity is that there's no obvious answer. There's no easy, right or wrong. It is all about exploring possibilities, exploring polarities. And so the strength of curiosity is that you don't immediately jump to the right answer, but that you kind of say, hey, interesting, let me learn more about this, let me explore this, let me look at many options before I narrow it down to one solution. So it is very enriching, and I think it's also the foundation of then future innovation and forward thinking.
You guys have really got behind curiosity at Novartis. What does it mean in the context of Novartis for everyday work and the lives of everybody there?
Our hope is that it creates an environment where people feel like it's not only about what you know today, but also this environment of constant learning. What I like to say is, can you keep learning about those around you and your colleagues, what their thinking is, learn from the external world, but also learn by looking inward. So can you really take this kind of 360-degree approach to learning, to be curious about all three of those different spheres? And in doing so, our hope is that, again, people will come up with more innovative ideas, have bigger impact. Now, practically, how do we do that? I think providing access to a range of tools, Coursera, LinkedIn Learning, and I think Simon and his team have done an extraordinary job in providing a broad range of ways for our associates to tap into their curiosity. We do a lot of work on self-awareness, so kind of self-curiosity as well. And then in part of creating this unbossed culture, we want to create this environment where people get curious when they have somebody disagree with them in a meeting or have a different perspective. And I think all of that together hopefully builds this kind of environment of curiosity.
This environment of curiosity and the overall culture was part of the people strategy that we renewed last year. So maybe, Stephen, could you just take us through, why did Novartis come up with a first people strategy, and what did that look like?
In order to execute on this ambitious plan we have for Novartis and for mankind, we had to have a different culture as a company. And when you think about culture, it is a massive organizational change that starts with individual change. So we had to rethink our entire approach to all of our people processes. The second thing is, and Vas has already referred to the Industrial Revolution, it's interesting that we use the word human resources. It's almost like a reference to cogs in a big machine. We have rediscovered the value of people. They're our most important and our most precious asset in this company. And that's also why we deliberately decided to change the name from human resources to people. And that's where it started.
Stephen, I know that Novartis has researched the impact of culture on performance. What did you discover there?
I think it's very important that culture is not seen purely in the soft skill set, something that is delegated to historically the human resources department and almost an afterthought of we also need to make sure that it's a bit of fun to work here. What we really believe is that if you create the right environment for your people to thrive and to really bring their full selves to work, that you just will get better decision making, more integrity, stronger performance, and as a result, a better company reputation, and most of all, a better company performance. But that was a thought, so we needed to validate that. And so we've done two things. Externally, we commissioned a piece of work that went through all the culture studies. And what was interesting is that clearly demonstrated that when you have a fit-for-purpose culture, so you link your culture to what it is you want to achieve as a company, and you make a sustained, deliberate effort to achieve that you will get better performance. There was a very strong correlation there. Internally, we're doing work to look at our best performing leaders and our best performing units, and we're looking at all the culture data we have there. What we're already seeing is a very strong correlation. What we're now doing some work on is to find, through behavioral scientists, what are the causal links? Is it first strong performance and therefore a positive culture? Or is there a very clear common trend between that culture? And so we hope to find more about that very soon.
And this is a question for both of you. How do you know if this culture change has been working and what progress you've been making?
Yeah, I think one of the things that Stephen team and with great external partners is we've really taken on measurement and how do you measure a culture. And there's no perfect way to measure, but I think you can get a lot of good markers. I mean, we have engagement surveys, we pulse quarterly. We have upward feedback on our leaders that is regularly obtained. We benchmark against other organizations, the various benchmarks you can get, 25, 50 best places to work. And then we track that over time and we see, do our interventions make a change? And we start to see the numbers really move. And I think the questions are standardized. They link to Inspired, Curious, Unbossed. And it's been really amazing to see. And one of the things that's happened along the way is a significant shift in the mindset of our leaders. We have daily sales and daily financial reports, but our people organization has also made completely transparent as well this data around engagement, culture, etc. And so now the normal course of conversation for leaders at Novartis is not only to talk about their numbers, but also to talk about their culture numbers, let's say. And that's been a big shift.
I remember going back probably about 6 months into role, and you were doing a town hall or a sort of meet and greet. And one of the questions I asked you there was around which aspect of the culture change is sort of proving hardest. And at that point, the answer was curiosity, that it seemed to not be resonating. So I wonder if you've got any thoughts on why that one was the hardest of the three parts of our culture to sort of, I guess, get traction across the company, and maybe the change you've seen since.
Yeah, Simon, there's a few different dimensions to why I think that initially was a struggle. One, we were a very knowing culture. And when you think about how a company like ours develops, we have experts, a lot of experts in lots of different fields. And they all think rightfully or understandably that they know the answers. And so it's all about trying to prove you're right and that you look good by knowing answers. And so shifting that to a curiosity mindset, a learning mindset, we're constantly looking for new ideas, challenging your ideas, integrating your new ideas into your current way of looking at the world required one shift. Second, when you look at how we approach learning inside of Novartis, and you know this well, it was primarily around standard operating procedures and compliance training. It wasn't really about exploring and opening up your mind to new possibilities, even if things far afield from Novartis. So making that shift and opening up things like Coursera, LinkedIn Learning, and others was also, I think, a critical step. And then the third thing, I think it was the behavior of managers. I think, again, managers valued knowers and always kind of knew the answers in meetings. I see a demonstrable shift to people asking open-ended questions. So now fast forward a few years later, I think we're making great progress on the curiosity front. But it took, I think, shifts in all three of those areas.
You're listening to the Curious Advantage podcast, inspired by the book The Curious Advantage, written by Paul Ashcroft, Simon Brown, and Garrick Jones. Subscribe to the podcast today.
Stephen, as Vas just said, there's clearly a strong link with curiosity and learning, but curiosity goes beyond that. What else do you see as part of curiosity beyond learning?
Of course, you need to create the environment and the tools and make them user-friendly so people can learn and find information. What I would also add is you first need the psychological safety. There is something intimidating about curiosity in the sense that you first need to admit that there could be different points of views, there could be different answers, or that you may not have the answer. So is there an expectation that people have the answer, or is there an environment where people say, that's fascinating, I have no clue, let's explore this? And so we have to create that psychological safety. The second thing is, and Vas already alluded to it, but it's the questions that you ask. And so personally, I've learned to ask different questions. Previously, my questions were definitely always listening to fix. You have a problem, I need a few points of data from you so I can solve the problem. I'm practicing listening to learn. And so how you ask questions and how you open rather than narrow the issue is very influential in how you learn and how you also role model curiosity.
And for anyone that's not familiar with the sort of terms, listen to learn, listen to fix, Jennifer Garvey-Berger has some great work around listening to win, listening to fix, and listening to learn, which is really useful. If I can come back to you, Vas, around last year. So February 2019, we had the conversation at the executive committee where there was the support to invest 100 million of additional funds into learning over the next 5 years, and also the support for 100 hours of learning, or 5% of people's time, as an aspiration to be spent on learning. If there are other leaders out there who may be considering whether or not to invest in learning and curiosity, what do you see as the business values and the sort of return from investing in learning or curiosity?
Yeah, I'll start with a kind of broader sentiment. What I find in this role is whenever we make a move to support our people, show that we care about our people's well-being, how our people grow and expand their horizons, it leads to growth in our company overall across all other performance measures. So if you take that as a starting place, then, and knowing that a sense of curiosity, learning, mastery is so important to human motivation, it's almost a no-brainer to invest wherever you can in providing better learning opportunities for your people. We've seen the stats, I think, very impressive in terms of the number of people signing up for courses in a broad range, whether it's language, whether it's digital, whether it's on leadership, and being highly engaged to improve themselves. And of course, they'll bring that better self to the office. But I think that the biggest thing is the signal and sentiment you send. You send a signal that you care about knowledge and learning, and you care about creating this environment of curiosity. So I would tell another leader to just do it.
Fantastic. And you referenced the sort of hours and time. So we'd had, I think, 3 years of reducing time spent learning. And then last year, with the push around or the change around curiosity, we saw over a 50% increase in the amount of time that Novartis associates spent learning. I mean, from your perspective, what really sort of unleashed that wave of curiosity across the company?
I think it's a combination of things. First of all, the symbol, but also the communication. Simon, you were very creative in bringing the Netflix of learning to Novartis. The fact that it was transparent to people what Vas's favorite learning topics were, what my favorite learning topics were, it makes it catchy and appealing to others to join it. Secondly, I think it's about making it easy for people. We've done a lot of work to make it easier to access learning, to find your content. If people need to spend too long to find something, they'll give up and they'll switch to something else. And then I think the learning months and the learning rallies and all of that we've done, again, it's an invitation for people to join in. We definitely have more work to do. There is still kind of, is it okay to learn during work hours feeling that exists with people. That is a change management like any other change management.
And that's somewhere where I've been hugely grateful to both of you, because I think a key part of changing the mindset around learning has been the role modeling. And both of you have been very forward in sharing your own personal learnings, the learnings that you're taking, and promoting the courses or the catalogues that we're offering to people. And I think that's really helped in that mindset shift. And why has that been so important for you to role model learning?
One of the great joys I've realized over the years of life is to constantly be learning about new things. I find a tremendous amount of energy. I'm an avid reader, podcast listener, periodical reader. I find it is very rewarding in its own right, but also helps me lead better, see new connections, make a connection that I wouldn't have otherwise made. I'm very taken by this concept of building range. Just to quote another book, I recently completed David Epstein's book on range, and how people who really are able to impact the world consistently over time build tremendous range within themselves. In an era where it's tempting to become a hyper-specializer, being curious, learning, building your own range across a range of different areas is tremendously valuable to yourself, but also to the organizations you work in.
If I could add something to that, because what I found interesting, and Vas is definitely a natural learner. As long as I've known Vas, he comes with curiosity. For me, I am embarrassed to say I had to relearn because the job is so demanding and so consuming that it was tempting for me after a long day of work to kind of switch off, do a workout, spend some time with my kids, and just read an easy novel. I had to rediscover learning and overcome that initial barrier of it's hard to learn. Now that I'm into it, it's addictive. Now I'm kind of thinking like, wow, every time I learn something, a new door opens up and new possibilities emerge. But I think we also need to meet people where they are. Not everybody is already naturally curious. And so how can we invite them back in? And I think our Western education system, school system, has sometimes made curiosity difficult because you were supposed to always know the answer. It was always a test about right and wrong. And so we need to make learning and curiosity attractive again. And that's what we're trying to achieve.
A curious culture is a game changer. What does curiosity mean for you? Follow #CuriousAdvantage and join the conversation.
During the current pandemic that we're all sadly living through, you and the organization have taken curiosity and learning beyond the company with Coursera and, as we know, support for the Khan Academy. Could you tell us more about that, please?
Yeah, and I think it was a great thinking from our learning team on Coursera. The idea was, given that families are home together, what is another way we can show that we support curiosity, but even support curiosity within the family? So we opened up the possibility of family members to leverage the Novartis Coursera relationship. We didn't know how it was going to go, but I think Simon must have the data. I think it was very well received.
It's actually over 9,000 people have taken advantage of it as at today. So within the space of a couple of weeks, it's been phenomenal uptake. Yep.
And then with Khan Academy, my wife and I have been advocates of Khan Academy for years. Our children are kind of super users of Khan Academy. But the thought occurred to us, well, if we were going to support an educational effort, online learning effort for children of Novartis associates, could we do it in a way that would also enable anyone to learn using the platform? And as Khan Academy likes to say, their goal is to let anyone learn anything, anytime for free. So we, Simon and the team, were able to connect with Khan Academy, and we were able to help them scale, one of 4 companies helping them scale their effort for the pandemic. I understand from Sal Khan that they've had triple to quadruple the number of users over this period of time. And so we can now help bring high quality education for children to a lot more people, which I think is also exciting.
It's interesting how now at this time of lockdown, it's learning that becomes one of the things that gives us meaning and lets us move forward and keep ourselves busy. Stephen, you talked earlier about coming home and reading a novel. I really want to encourage both of you to read our book, The Curious Advantage, where we try to make the case for curiosity being the greatest driver of value in the digital era. Stephen, you talked about complexity earlier. Are there other factors and other things that you think are causing curiosity to be at the center of the digital era?
It's interesting over the last few years. In addition to the culture change towards this inspired, curious, and unbossed, we've definitely pushed the digital agenda. Now, what we've seen is we're able to predict sales through algorithms with a very high level of accuracy. In the current pandemic, it's useless because all the algorithms take into account historic trends and analogs, and there is no analog for the current situation. This is where curiosity, this is where the human brain is the only solution of, hey, this is new, let's explore what's possible. And so I think the two go very well hand in hand. Vas, your view?
Yeah, when you look at the way digital technologies make, in some ways, very obvious things readily knowable. My children can quickly Google almost anything. The need for, I think, building a learning mindset to learn about more complex topics becomes, I think, much, much more important. One of the things that Novartis were employing is something called the Cynefin framework. And that looks at the different ways you can categorize problems as simple, complicated, and complex. I think in the digital age, the simple and the complicated become more and more automated. And so you're left with the complex. And the only way you can navigate complexity is to have a mindset of inquiry where you're constantly asking questions, navigating, understanding there's not going to be any absolute answers, as we're learning now in the age of a pandemic. But you have to almost be an explorer. And to explore, you have to be very curious. So I think that shift where human beings are being asked more and more to engage in the world of the complex is going to keep nudging people towards being more curious if they want to be, I think, successful.
Maybe if I bring things a bit more personal now. So, Stephen, you talked about Vas as being naturally curious and yourself as coming late to curiosity and, if you like, retraining yourself to become curious. So, Vas, starting with you, how has curiosity helped you over the course of your career?
Well, I think I'm sort of a case study, as Stephen said, as somebody who's pathologically curious, if there is such a thing. I'm somebody who I think over the years, it's allowed me to navigate many different worlds, starting out in bench science. I then moved from bench science to public health and was able to kind of navigate the worlds of public health in Africa and Latin America. We got very curious about that, then curious about the business world and shifted to management consulting and then into a big company. At Novartis, I have worked across marketing, general management, medical, product development, probably manufacturing, and now as CEO. And in every one of these areas, I had to be intensely curious to learn a new space, integrate that with prior knowledge. And I would argue that probably the biggest ideas I've come up with over the course of my career were not because of the focused work I was doing within Novartis. It was the exploration of reading and learning outside of Novartis, all of the other places that I was visiting or podcasts I was listening to or books I was reading, kind of created that enriched environment in my mind, maybe to see a different way of doing things.
Fantastic. Love the pathologically curious. And Stephen, from your perspective?
Well, I would hope I'm a returnee to curiosity. My background is a legal background. And what's interesting about that is it's all about stories and beliefs that people have. There is no right, no wrong. It's what one party believes versus what the other party believes. And they're both very confident that they are on the right side of the story. So I've always been comfortable with ambiguity, and I've always accepted that there is no single answer to a question. But I think in the current times, I spend a lot of time now reading history. I think we can learn a lot today about what happened in the past. Even if the times were different, there's a lot of similarities, and the drivers of human behavior haven't changed that much. Whenever I'm confronted with a situation, I think what would be a similar kind of situation, and let's learn about that one to see what would apply today.
Being curious isn't easy for everyone. So are there aspects that you find of curiosity that are actually hard? So Stephen, you talked about having to retrain a bit around curiosity, but what's the hardest thing that you each find about being curious?
One thing I find challenging and I work on is how to read and understand perspectives that are very different than my own. I think it's easy to kind of get to a bias where you want to have sources of knowledge that just reaffirm the way you look at the world and have an aversion to those that, may give a very different perspective. So I've taken to try to push myself to say, let's find somebody who's got a very different perspective on something and read it with an open mind and say, how can I learn from this?
For leaders who are convinced by the value curiosity could bring to their organizational team, what could they do to encourage curiosity, do you think?
I think role modeling has a huge element. I think people look at leaders and then leaders have huge influence with the shadow they cast across the organization. So I think role modeling is incredibly important. That role modeling is, of course, the behavior of what do you read and understand and sharing that, but also Are you somebody who asks questions or makes statements? Are you somebody who values knowing or values understanding and exploring? I think the other thing leaders can do is, as we've discussed, find the tools and technologies that make learning just incrementally easier, and then have the courage to make the investment and try to give people time to do that. And I think just those two acts, investment and creating the time, will, I think, send a big signal to the organization that it's valuable to learn. And then maybe the third point what I was just mentioning is take the time to explore alternative points of view and show the organization that you're very open to exploring alternative points of view. I think one of the most dangerous things right now we have in the world with the advent of all of the digital technologies is you can easily live a life of just having the AI algorithms reinforce your view of the world. And curiosity is the solution to that, probably mindfulness and curiosity. So if you're self-aware of the perspective that you have and curious about an alternative perspective, you probably can then bridge a lot of the gaps that currently divide us today.
I'm fascinated in the digital era and in an era of more complexity. The answer is to put people at the center of things and find our curiosity. It's amazing, Simon, don't you think? That the great irony is that humanity is at the center of the digital age.
Exactly. That actually it's a very human trait that will actually help us to navigate through the complexity. So maybe to bring us to a wrap up. So what would be each of your key takeaways for people listening to this conversation around the importance of curiosity?
A curious mind is a mind that I think over time finds a great deal of fulfillment and is able to have, a much bigger impact on those around you, your organizations, the topics you care about, and ultimately, I think, more fulfilled. And I think there's no one right way to be curious, but I think finding your outlets for curiosity, your ways of exploring is incredibly valuable and enriching. And the one other tip I would give is all of the research is showing that if you want to consolidate all of that curiosity and learning, sleep well also, and the learning will have an even bigger impact.
I think we're naturally impatient, and so often we reward ourselves too quickly for coming up with an answer. I think giving time and space and learning to question yourself, what's another way of looking at this? What is the alternative here? What would be the consequence if we would go in a different direction? And so for me, it's about learning to ask powerful questions to yourself and learn to be honest with those questions, but also to the organization. It's ultimately what you reward yourself for. Do you reward yourself for being the smartest, or do you reward yourself for being the most curious? And I think once you start to play with those concepts, an entirely new world will open up for you.
Great points for us to close on. So thank you so much for joining us today, Vas and Stephen. You've been listening to a Curious Advantage podcast. Join the conversation at #CuriousAdvantage. Subscribe today and keep exploring curiously. See you next time.
Thank you for listening to the Curious Advantage podcast. Stay tuned for the next episode and keep exploring curiously. This podcast is produced by Aliki Palinelli and edited by John McGinty and Jill Damatak-Futter.